Happy to catch up with this guy about once every year as we lead into media days here. And it's Tom Fornelli, CBS Sports.com college football writer. And you can hear him on the Cover 3 podcast, probably the best college football podcast there is out there for my money. And yeah, Tom, I like it, Tom. You guys are great. And this is a great time to listen to you guys as we kind of think about the college football season in general. But it's almost here. And zooming out, Tom, it's like this is a transformative season. I mean, the Pac-12 was gone, and it was swallowed up by its other Power 5, now Power 4 peers. And then we got a 12-team college football playoff. This is a turning point in college football.
Yeah, I was thinking, as you know, we're getting ready for the season starting here in a few weeks. Like, I don't recall since I started in this job going into a season feeling like I know less than what I know, or like knowing what to expect. Because like the SEC now, Texas and Oklahoma are in the league, and I'm sitting there, I'm watching SEC media days earlier this week, and it's none of this stuff has really dawned on me because all of a sudden I'm watching and Dusty Dvoracek's on like the desk on SEC now. I'm like, why is Dusty Dvoracek, an Oklahoma grad, on SEC Network? And it's like, oh yeah. And now, you know, you mentioned we've got 4 new programs during the Big Ten. There's 12 teams in the playoff. It's like trying to remember who's where, and now all the kind of playoff paths that have opened for schools that I would not have really considered playoff contenders. It's everything from that. And then even like, who's the best player in college football? I don't know. Like, if you think going into last year, we had Caleb Williams coming off a Heisman, and I know he didn't really have the greatest season last year. USC kind of stunk, but you just had a sense of who the best players were, who the best teams were going to be. And I think that going into 2024, we know Ohio State will be good. We know Georgia will be good, but Michigan's the defending national champion, and they've got an entire new coaching staff and a roster for the most part. So there's so many questions about that. Like, it's a very exciting, but also for me, because I like to be prepared, kind of scary time.
Mm-hmm. And I want to ask you this because I'm excited to actually talk about the football, but it's hard not to focus on what is the tectonic shifts that we have had. So 10 years from now, 15 years from now, Tom, like, where are we? Like, where do you think we're at in the spectrum or the map of wherever it is we're going?
I think I don't know if everything will be totally different 10, 20 years from now, but I do think we're going to keep going in the same direction that we're going and have been going, in that it will be a 2-league kind of sport. In that, yes, the Big 12 will probably still exist. The ACC will probably still exist in some form, although probably not the form we currently look at it in based on what's happening in courtrooms right now. But I do think that the further we go, the more condensed and just streamlined, I guess would be the cool word to use, with the way things go, that this sport is going to be. We are going to just keep moving from 135 teams or whatever to a 20-team, 24-team kind of sport, in which there are 2 leagues everybody cares about, and then there are the other leagues that people care about if they went to those schools.
And that's kind of the big picture nightmare I have in my head if I'm an Illinois fan, is just like, are we in there? How do we fit into what this will be? Like, I don't know if they'll be the next Washington State or Oregon State, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like, if I'm Wake Forest and all those schools, I'm pretty scared right now with what Florida State and Clemson are doing. I think Illinois is maybe even better than some other Big Ten schools in a better situation, but it just feels like contraction's not done. The streamlining, as you said, is not done.
Yeah, it's gonna. I mean, I don't know. I think the Big Ten will probably hit 20 here in the next few years. I think the SEC will then respond by hitting 20. Like, a lot depends on what happens in the ACC right now, and with Florida State and Clemson and those lawsuits. If they get out, what direction does that league go? Does the SEC then just decide, you know what, we could probably use a few more teams that maybe aren't competing for national titles, but we can at least help our other teams get some wins? You know what I mean? So, yeah, it is a very delicate situation. I do think long term, like you mentioned, like Wake Forest, I think smaller private schools probably in a lot of trouble. I think bigger state schools like Illinois, yeah, there is reason to be concerned, but I do think that with such a large alumni base and kind of just like in this NIL era, there will be a spot for them. But like Northwestern, I don't know.
I'm with you. All right. So these new 4 additions in the Big Ten, how does this set up? Like, how does this change the league for whatever tier of school it is? How does this change the league for Ohio State? How does it change the league for Purdue and Illinois?
I think for Ohio State, it's a very different kind of change, in that if we think about like the history of the Big Ten, like obviously pre-World War II, lots of different teams won national titles, lots of teams won Big Ten. But for most of the last 75 years, it's been a two-school league for the most part as far as when it comes to winning the conference. It is usually Ohio State, it is usually Michigan. But now you're adding in a USC, you're adding in a Washington team that got to the national title game last year and has won national titles in its past. And you're adding an Oregon program that hasn't reached that level yet, but has been slowly kind of ascending to that level for about 20 years now. And Dan Lanning has that program humming. So I think if you are an Ohio State or a Michigan, you've been pretty okay at beating up on Penn State. You've been pretty okay at beating up on the Iowas or the Wisconsins, whoever you meet in Indianapolis. But the sledding's going to get a little tougher. I don't know if any of those programs are in a spot right now where I think they are legit threats to Ohio State. Like, if I'm looking at this year of the 4 new programs, the one I think has the best shot to win the Big Ten is Oregon because it is a very talented team. But I also think we can't underestimate the difficulty of adjusting to an entire new league. Like, if you are Ohio State, you have to learn a couple new teams that are on your schedule. If you're Oregon, you have to learn 12 new teams that you don't play, and you have to learn their tendencies, and you have to learn all this stuff. And I think that these days it's not as difficult to do because there is so much movement as far as coaches and players that you're kind of learning new teams every year to begin with. But it's still like, as far as putting together your schedule and routine, like, you're flying back and forth across the country. If you look at UCLA's schedule, they're flying out to Hawaii, flying back to LA, flying to New Jersey, flying back to LA. Like, how do you put together a schedule to have your team prepared to play these games and also, practice and all that kind of stuff? So it will be difficult, but I think grander scheme, it's going to be harder for the Ohio States and the Michigans because I think there are more like battle ready, talent tested kind of opponents that you're going to have to get through to win the league. As far as the Illinois and the Purdue's, well, I look, if I'm Illinois, I'm not that worried about UCLA coming in.
Right.
I'm not that worried about Washington. It's a good school, it's a good program capable of good things, but it's not like a, giant behemoth that I'm worried I can never beat. Oregon and USC make things difficult. I think the biggest question for an Illinois, Purdue, and really anybody in the Big Ten West the last few years is, all right, how are we going to fare now that we're no longer kind of, in our little cocoon of playing our little complimentary football, big beefy men in cornfield football that we're used to playing. And we're going to have to play Oregon and USC and Ohio State a lot more often than we have been, and not just hopefully get to Indianapolis and hope things go our way. So I think for everybody, it becomes more difficult. The question is, it's more depends on what your goal was. If you're hoping to win the Big Ten every year and get to the playoff, it's becoming more difficult. If you're just hoping to be a bowl team and get to 7, 8 wins every year, it's becoming more difficult. The only question is the context and the scale of what you're trying to accomplish. And I think Illinois, I mean, we've had plenty of struggles regardless before the expansion trying to get to bowl games every year. So I don't know if the goal really shifts as much or if the approach needs to shift. You kind of just need to keep doing what you've been doing. And there won't be nearly as many cupcake games, but those, honestly, when was the last time Illinois really played cupcake games? Even our old non-conference schedules, like we've got Kansas this year on the non-con, and we've done that in recent years where we've got the Missouri game where, they're bringing back. Illinois has never played a cupcake schedule to begin with, so I don't know how much stuff really changes.
Yeah, especially when you get Purdue and Northwestern every year. It's kind of like an insulated Big Ten West for them a little bit, right? Like they need to start beating those teams in the future. So I want to get back to some of the big storylines in the Big Ten, but you are a University of Illinois guy, Tom. So, and this is an Illinois podcast, of course. So I want to ask you, entering year 4 with Bret Bielema, what do you make of Bret Bielema's Illini program?
I think that what Bret's program has done an outstanding job of, the biggest improvement they've made is that the floor to me is a lot higher. Whereas I think back to, even the Levy era, the Beckman era, and before that, it's like you were just hoping to do better than like 3-9 some years. Like those were like legit concerns. You would look at this team like, oh man, this might be a very long and rough season. I feel like where we're at is place now where 5-7 is, oh, that's the bad year. Like being close to getting to a bowl game is a bad season. Just missing a bowl, not having a terrible year. So I think that has been the biggest accomplishment that Bret and his staff have created since coming here. I know they had the 8-win season 2 years ago, which I think probably exceeded expectations quite a bit, and we kind of crashed back down a little bit last year. But I do believe that we're still working towards getting to where, the bowl game every single year is the first step. And it's a lot more difficult to do than I think that 1 8-5 season kind of maybe led some part of the fan base thinking, oh, okay, we're here now. This is just who we are. But we've had so many struggles finding that consistency in the last couple of decades that just getting that consistency is a huge first step that you have to complete before you can move on to that next step. And I think this year will be a good indicator of really how far we've come. Like if we don't bounce back and get to a bowl game, I think some doubt starts creeping in again amongst the fan base. But if we do get to 6-6 or 7-5, and I know compared to like a lot of Big Ten teams, the schedule is not a monster. But I think in the context of Illinois, like, yeah, we get Northwestern and we get Purdue, and those are games that we should win, but we have struggled to win consistently. I just think that getting to 6 or 7 wins right now should be the baseline of expectation or hope for 2024, and anything after that is gravy. And like I heard you on Summer School, which came out, our Cover 3 Illinois version came out over the weekend. That Kansas game is huge.
Yeah.
Like getting it at home, that's a good team. Jalen Daniels should still be healthy, so that's going to be a problem. But they're also somewhat vulnerable because it'll only be the second game they've played since Andy Kotelnicki left to become the offensive coordinator at Penn State. So there's a transition they're going through as well. So I feel like that is the kind of game it's you never want to go with. It's a make or break game in week 2 of the season. But I do think that game will have a tremendous impact on the overall record that the team has and how the season goes. Because if you start off really well and you get confidence built up going into conference play, it carries through. If you come in and you play poorly and you kind of, they got trounced by the Jayhawks last year in Lawrence. Like maybe the score didn't really accurately reflect how badly they were dominated in that game. If you have that kind of repeat performance, doubt starts to creep in, not just in the fan base's mind, but maybe in some of the players and coaching staff mind about what this team could do, and it can impact the whole year.
Yeah, I mean, you have Eastern Illinois, Central Michigan sandwiching that game. But if you win that game, I think of what attendance becomes if you create that excitement, but also, as you're saying, the confidence of potentially going into Nebraska 3-0. Or you could come out of Nebraska at 2-2 with at Penn State, home against Purdue, Michigan, at Oregon. Like that's a scary sight. So I think that game is huge. And I do think Kotelnicki's an unbelievable offensive coordinator. Like what he was doing to Aaron Henry's defense last year was pretty insane. But it's a big test for the defense too, right? Given that, like it's kind of a prove it game for the defense to show that, hey, they can give the team a chance to win, because I believe this is a pretty big year for Aaron Henry.
Yeah, I think that, you saw last year, it's a first-time defensive coordinator. He's in a role that he's never been thrown into, where it's like you're calling the plays, you're trying to figure everything out on the fly. And there were definitely speed bumps and growing pains at times, and like in certain games, you're like, well, why are we doing this instead of this? And you hope that the more experience that you get going into the second year, you see, again, here's the word, a more streamlined, efficient approach to what you're doing defensively. But at the same time, you also like, there are a lot of really good coaches out there across the Big Ten. Every single program in this country has strong coaches. The players are going to be what makes the difference at the end of the day. And for me, Aaron Henry, if his players live up to their potential and do what they're best at, he's going to look like a lot better defensive coordinator than what we saw last year, where I felt like at times that the defense last season, they were so young and inexperienced in the secondary. And like you have that kind of combination with a young and inexperienced play caller on the defensive side of the ball with the inexperienced players, and you're going to see a lot of mistakes and a lot of questionable decisions. But I felt like too often last year, that defense was kind of Johnny Newton or bust. It was like, all right, Johnny will save us. And then if Johnny was getting double teamed or he just wasn't having like any play where he wasn't making a monster effort or just making the big play, they were getting torched. And I feel like you want to see a more cohesive unit in that direction. Like I think we have the talent on the defensive line to not be the best defensive line in the Big Ten, but to be a disruptive and an above average unit in the league. I think we have good linebackers. I think getting Terrence Brooks at corner is huge for the secondary because he's a very talented player. And I think having that year of experience for a lot of these young guys stepping into these roles is huge. So I look at the defense, and I don't think it's going to be the 2022 level of elite. Oh my God, we've got like 7 NFL players on this defense kind of level. But it's got to be better than last year, where we're allowing nearly 30 points per game in conference play. And yeah, I know 2 games really heavily skewed that late in the season, but just based on Bret Bielema's history and everything his teams have been, that did not look like what you expect from this defense under Bielema or any of his defensive coordinators. So we need to see and just improvement across the board on that side of the ball, not just fundamentals, but just get after the quarterback, be more disruptive. That was the one biggest problem I think we had last year. And I think that would have helped the secondary a lot if we had put more quarterbacks under pressure.
Flipping to the other side of the ball, Barry Lunny Jr. did not have a great first half, or his unit did not last year, but really good end of the season. Luke Altmaier played better before the injury than we know what John Paddock did. Caden Fagan, when he was healthy, I thought gave them a dimension that they just didn't have. So you lose a bunch of talent. Your starting tight ends, an NFL draft pick. Casey Washington is a draft pick. Isaiah Williams is gone, and John Paddock's gone. Isaiah Adams gone. But it feels like you're building something there. Right, Tom? Like, so what do you make of this offense going into year 3 of Barry Lunny, year 2 with Luke Altmaier quarterback?
I'm with you on the offensive line. I'm kind of really excited about how good this offensive line might be. And I think we've talked about it on Cover 3. I know you've talked about it on this show. JC Davis, the Illini getting him, I think, was a coup, because that is a player, like, you go into every offseason. What is every single freaking team in the country looking for in the portal? We want an offensive tackle. Ohio State wants them. Alabama wants them. Every blue blood wants them. And he's probably the best one, I think, based on what I saw outside of Caden Proctor, who did the old switcheroo there between Iowa and Alabama. He was probably the best one available. And we got him. So, like, that's an excellent move by the coaching staff to get there early, get him in. I think that is an upgrade. I think that in turn upgrades every other spot along the line, because it allows guys to play positions I think they're more comfortable with and they probably are better at. It gives you more depth to be able to withstand the injuries that you are 100% going to suffer, because no football team gets through a season without injuries on their offensive line. And I think that based on the way that Illinois likes to play, that is the one area you really need to be solid at. Like, if your offensive line is bad, the complementary kind of football that Illinois wants to play is not going to work. And I think that we saw at times last year, early in the season, the offensive line was awful, and the offense was awful. The offensive line improved as the year went along and got healthier and got some guys in better spots, and the offense magically improved. And I think that that is the one thing I have going into this year, where we saw last season Illinois got into shootouts. They won a couple of them. They lost a couple of them. I'm hoping that defensively the improvements are enough that we don't have to get in the shootout, but I think offensively we are capable of winning them if we need to, because yes, there are newcomers at receiver, but I think Zachary Franklin, who kind of had a lost season last year after transferring to Ole Miss, I think he's a huge pickup. He is not going to be like a first round NFL player type of guy, but he is an experienced, solid option who Illinois fans got a front row seat to watching him tear them apart 2 years ago in Champaign when he was playing for UTSA. He's got that kind of ability to where he could be the number one guy. He can catch, 75 catches, 1,000 yards, maybe 5 or 6, 7 touchdowns. He's got that kind of ability, which is something that you need. And it allows a lot of the younger guys, the less experienced, the Malik Elsies of the world, to not have the onus on them to be the man right away. Even though, it's just going into his second year, it'll be his first as a starter. It'll allow Malik Elsie more grace to grow into the role. It'll allow Pat Bryant, maybe, let's be honest, if we didn't get Franklin, Pat Bryant's probably getting double teamed a lot early in the year. So he's going to be in a lot of solo coverage because Franklin's going to, take away a lot, going to command a lot of attention. I just think they're so much more balanced on offense than they had been last year.
What do you think of Luke Altmaier? What did you see from him year 1? I knew there'd be growing pains, and there were early on. He got better, and then this amazing heater by John Paddock put him on the bench in the year. We didn't get a full picture of him, but I think we got a good look at him. What is your expectation for him going into year 2?
I want to see. I think he's a playmaker. I think, first of all, when things go on schedule, he's very good. Like, if the play is going as planned, he's going to execute it. He'll be fine. I also think that he has the ability to make stuff happen when it breaks down, because we saw him with his scrambling ability last year. He was able to make some really big plays when things went wrong. But he's also, the one area he needs to improve is, and I think this happened as the year went on, and it goes back to what I mentioned earlier with the offensive line just playing poorly at the start of the year. He got kind of shell-shocked. Like, he was feeling the pressure that wasn't there, or as like Sam Darnold once said on that Monday Night Football game, he was seeing ghosts. Like, he was just kind of anticipating somebody coming at him when there was nobody there, and he was just kind of turtling and shutting things down and taking sacks he shouldn't have ended up taking. I'm hoping that with an improved offensive line and just an offseason of going back in, knowing that he's the starter and being prepared for it in the second year in this offense and just becoming more familiar and more comfortable with what's going to be asked of him and what his strengths are. And also Barry Lunny learning Luke Altmaier and just figuring out what plays we want to run for him, what plays he succeeds at and excels at. You want to see some kind of improvement in that area. But I do think that he's a talented player. I think it's just like a lot of college quarterbacks. When you're pressured, what decisions do you make? Because we saw he would make bad decisions, and he had a lot of turnovers early in the year, and he started cleaning that up as the season went along. So if you get second half of the season, Luke Altmaier before he got hurt and had, John freaking Paddock came in and did John freaking Paddock stuff, like I think that's a good sign because you don't need Luke Altmaier to be an all-conference quarterback for this offense to be good. You just need him to make smart decisions and not turn the ball over, and then make some plays with his legs and arm once in a while.
Tom, before we flip to the rest of the Big Ten, is there a player position group that you're really interested in to see once the games start here in the fall for Illinois?
I mean, I think our on defense, the edge rushers, I want to see Gabe Backus and take a step forward because I feel like he had a great freshman season, kind of took a step back last year. I'd like to see him show more of what we saw that freshman year because he is not just the twitchiest kind of most explosive guy, but he's so strong and he's very effective and he's off the ball quick. So even if he's not the ultra incredible athlete that you want to see, like with the bending at the way, like all that kind of fun scouting talk, he's a very effective player when he's playing well. And I'd like to see him take that step forward. And I'd also like to see Caden Fagan just at running back. I love giant running backs, and he's a giant running back who can move. We saw it, the long touchdown run against who did he have that long touchdown run against? Yeah. We've seen if he gets in the open field.
Tom, when he was the starter, they were good. They were a good football team when he was starting football games.
And again, this is like out of town, stupid kind of stuff. And it's nothing like I've seen a lot of talk when people are trying to look at the Illinois offense going into this year, like with Reggie Love leaving for Purdue. I've got Reggie Love was a great player for Illinois. I've got nothing against him. He was not the best running back on Illinois last year. So him moving on, to me, I would love to have another body around and another guy to share the carries, but I think Caden Fagan needs to be the number one kind of bell cow back in this offense because, like you said, they were better with him because he has the big playability. He can also get you I would like to see him improve in short yardage situations, which was it was ironic because a lot of times in short yardage, I felt like he was a little too tentative for a guy his size. I would like to see him be more aggressive, but I also think the offensive line played a role in that too. But I just think that's the kind of guy, if I'm looking at the Illinois offense right now, outside of the offensive line and JC Davis, if I'm looking at a guy, I'm saying that guy's got first team all Big Ten potential, it's him. And I want to see if he can live up to it because he is huge and he is fast and he is really fun to watch.
Yeah, and Bielema likes to use those running backs. All right, I feel like the story of the Big Ten, sorry, Illinois fans, it's boring. It's got to be Ohio State, right? Like everything they return, all the money that they have invested in this roster, and it's weird to say there's so much pressure on Ryan Day given what his record is, but he's lost the 3 games in a row to Michigan. And it feels like with Michigan and Harbaugh gone, and it's kind of a retooling year for them, even though they have a ton of talent. This has got to be it, right? That this is the year for him. So it feels like, I don't want to say national title game, but national title appearance, Big Ten championship or bust for sure.
Yeah, it is 100%. If they don't win the Big Ten, I think he gets fired. Honestly, I mean, unless he beats Michigan and they still lose the Big Ten, but I think you have to beat Michigan first and foremost. I think winning the Big Ten is the expectation. It is not a goal. But I do think that this is a team that, like when you look at everything they've done, they should be considered national title or bust because you don't make the kind of investments they've made in this roster without that being the expectation. Because like you look at that defense, they were already phenomenal last year. They spent the money to keep those players from going to the NFL who could have gone to the NFL. They might not have all been first or second round picks, but they could have gone and they could have gotten paid. So you had to pay up to keep them, like commensurate with what they would have gotten. You add Caleb Downs, who I don't know, Illinois fans might not be that familiar with him. He was a freshman last year at Alabama. He was a freshman starting at safety for Nick Saban on an Alabama team, and he might have been the best player on that Alabama defense as a freshman. The kid is phenomenal, and you don't step into that defense with all the stuff that Nick Saban asks of his safeties unless you are very good as a freshman, and he was very good at the role. So now you've added him to an already excellent Ohio State defense, which has probably great corners, great linebackers, great defense. They're just amazing everywhere you look on that side of the ball. They will not give up more than 14 points per game on average. And then offensively, I mean, you add Quinshon Judkins, who is exactly what Ohio State, I think, needed because they weren't great at running the ball last year. And especially in the red zone, they've really struggled to finish drives, which was one thing that kind of was their Achilles heel. Quinshon Judkins will fix that problem on his own. If you watched his work for Ole Miss in the red zone, he's an excellent running back in the red zone. He has a nose for the goal line. He knows how to get there. So you improve that. Ironically, when you think of like the Ryan Day Ohio State, you think of the great quarterbacks that they've had, the CJ Strouds, the Justin Fields. The one aspect of this Ohio State team I look at where I'm like, I don't know, is quarterback, with Will Howard coming in from Kansas State, who, don't get me wrong, he's a good quarterback, but he's not what I consider an elite quarterback. And if you look, Chris Kleiman at Big 12 Media Days was basically said the quiet part out loud because, they've got Avery Johnson there. He made it pretty clear. It's not like they were begging Will Howard to stay. They were kind of happy for him to move on so they could move on to Avery Johnson and start moving forward with him. So I think Will Howard for them is an upgrade on Kyle McCord in the aspects that, again, they struggled finishing in the red zone. So having a more mobile option at QB gives you another dimension to your offense in the red zone that defenses have to respect. And I think he's better under pressure because of his legs. But as far as passing the football, I don't know if Howard is a tremendous upgrade over Kyle McCord in any aspect. So if Kyle McCord was viewed as a weakness by that coaching staff last year, I don't think they've upgraded that tremendously. And that could be the one thing. Like if they lose to Michigan again, I would bet money on it being Will Howard having a bad game.
Yeah. Who's the biggest contender to Ohio State? Who's their biggest threat?
On paper, it's Oregon. But as I mentioned earlier in the show, like having to learn an entire new league will be difficult. And Dillon Gabriel, I just mentioned Will Howard. I think Dillon Gabriel, first of all, better than Will Howard. Yeah. But Dillon Gabriel's in the same position that Will Howard was, where Oklahoma wasn't exactly fighting for him to stay because they had the kid behind him in Jackson Arnold, who they want to ascend because they think he provides a higher ceiling for them. But I mean, Bo Nix was a first-round pick because that offense was perfectly suited to him. And I think Dillon Gabriel is just a left-handed Bo Nix. So we know it's going to work. We know he's going to be fine in that offense, and Oregon will be able to score points. But, man, I can't help but think we are just too dismissive of Michigan. Like the team,
a lot of first-round talent on that defense, especially.
Yeah, like we talk about how the offense is different, and I get it because Jim Harbaugh's gone. First of all, huge change. Sherrone Moore comes in, but Sherrone Moore's already got head coach wins over Penn State and Ohio State, and I don't know how many other coaches in the Big Ten can claim that in their entire careers. And yes, they have a new offensive line, but they're Michigan. Maybe there'll be some struggles early in the season, but I'm pretty confident Michigan and Sherrone Moore will have a strong offensive line by the time the season ends and they get to that Ohio State game. We don't know about the quarterback, but I mean, J.J. McCarthy, they played a lot of third and J.J. last year, and their new quarterback this year I do not think will be anywhere near as good as J.J. McCarthy, but the way they play, they don't need a great quarterback to be successful because they hand the ball off and they maul you. And Michigan treats its run game the same way so many teams treat its passing game, where there's so many bells and whistles and pre-snap stuff where everybody's trying to do all this cool stuff to confuse defenses and they pay no attention to the run game. Michigan's the exact opposite. Like the passing game is vanilla as hell. And the run game, they're like the San Francisco 49ers on steroids. It is really fun to watch. So I think they're going to be fine offensively. If they're not elite, they'll still be scoring 20 some odd points per game. And that defense, like you said, it is nothing but first round picks everywhere you look. They have what might be the two best defensive tackles playing next to each other in the country on the same defensive line. They have Will Johnson, who might be the best cornerback in the country playing in the secondary. They have solid 4- and 5-star players everywhere else across the board, and they've had 3-star veteran guys who they've developed and become very good. So, like, they might not have to score more than 17 points per game to win every single week. So I just think that I think Oregon is the pick as the biggest threat to Ohio State, but I'm telling you, I cannot get it out of the back of my head that Michigan is going to be sitting there in that game against Ohio State at the end of the season. And if Michigan wins, they will go to the Big Ten championship and Ohio State won't. I just see that scenario playing out time and time again in my sleep.
Before I let you go, Tom, what team are you higher on in the Big Ten than the consensus?
USC, which is weird because at this time a year ago, I mean, it was funny. I wrote a column and I caught a lot of flack from USC people about it because they were so weak on their lines of scrimmage that I says, man, this team's going to show up to the Big Ten and they're going to go 7-5 because they're just going to get bullied and beat up. And then they went 7-5 in Pac-12 last year. But I do think like Lincoln Riley finally did what people have been begging him to do for years. He's got rid of Alex Grinch. He's just completely overhauled his defensive staff and he's brought in very good defensive coaches. And you're not going to see USC go from being dog doo-doo on defense last year to being an elite unit in one offseason. But they're going to be closer to average. And considering the way that Lincoln Riley can scheme up an offense, you don't need to have a great defense to win a lot of games if you're USC, because you're probably going to be scoring close to 40 points per game. And I think that last year, Caleb Williams was so talented that Lincoln didn't really game plan for opponents as much. I think a lot of it was Caleb will figure it out because he's awesome. And if you watched them in their bowl game when they had Miller Moss in, it looked a lot more like a Lincoln Riley offense again, where they were scheming things for the quarterback, getting guys open, having a game plan that wasn't just our quarterback rules and he'll figure it out. So I think you're going to see improvement schematically from USC's offense this year. I think you're going to see improvement from them defensively. I don't think they have the depth of talent along the lines of scrimmage still to compete for a Big Ten title in year one. But I do think that they are a team that could come in and win 9 games and maybe mess around and get close to winning 10. Like, I do think they are going to exceed most people's expectations.
My pick is going to be boring. Iowa, because of the opposite reasons you said about USC. Their defense, Phil Parker, know how to scheme a defense, and they got a new coordinator on offense, and I don't expect Tim Lester's offense to be dog doo-doo. Maybe it's still below average, but their schedule is really easy too. So I can see them getting another 10-plus win season there too.
They're going to have pre-snap motion this year. I don't know how Iowa fans are going to respond. It's like, why is that guy running before they snap the ball? What's going on here?
Yeah, and will they respond to it well? Will they run it well? I'm interested to see how that evolves, but it's just their schedule, and they do what they do. I think they could be a sneaky college football playoff contender there. Tom Fornelli, CBSSports.com. Read him there. You can follow him on X as well, at Tom Fornelli. Tom, appreciate the time as always. Enjoy Big Ten Media Days. We'll see you out there, man.
Thanks for having me, ILL.